Packed room here at the Hyatt Regency, and a lot of wonderful folks here in Phoenix, one of our favorite towns. We're here under the auspices of KTAR, and later we're going to have the mingling microphone and be talking to a whole bunch of people here. We're going to have a lot of fun because we'll talk about anything you want to talk about. It's my great pleasure to welcome to our microphones another Arizonan. He is also, in my opinion, one of the best in this country at what he does, which is writing novels. He wrote The Shootist, which is one of my all-time favorite books. Bless the Beasts and the Children, Where the Boys Are, They Came to Cordova. He's had many of his books, 3 of those, 4 maybe made into films. His newest was published this summer by Donald Fine, The Old Colts. Let's welcome Mr. Glendon Swarthout to our microphone. Got to move in close on that thing. You've got to move in a little close on this thing. Where did you come from? Everybody came from somewhere.
Michigan, 26 years ago.
You're going to have to move in closer.
All right.
What brought you here?
I suppose the idea of Arizona, as much as the geography, the space, the perspective that one could get, or I thought one could get, on the United States, on the history of the United States. We liked the climate. I was very impressed by the mountains. To me, there's always been something symbolic about mountains. Mountains are a presence in one's life. They're there when you go to bed at night. In the morning when you rise, they're there. You can have war, fire, flood, famine, pestilence, and so on. The mountains will be there. So it was the idea of this space and these mountains and the things that I thought could be found here. For example, I had a suspicion that there was a mother lode of fictional material here which had not yet been discovered. That there was a material enough in Arizona for 12 or more books. And luckily, fortunately, it's been proved true. I have found that many books here.
Did every one of those fantasies bring a reality? In other words, was there any area of disappointment?
I think the only area of disappointment has been the almost incredible growth, which has subtracted a little from that space where I live. In other words, there are so many more people than there were then, and so many more buildings. This was 26 years ago, and there has been a considerable change in the valley and in Arizona. But in general, the fantasies have all proved true.
Because all those people, I guess, had the same idea you did.
Precisely.
Is it easier to write here?
No, I don't think it's easy to write anywhere. Whether it be a city, whether it be a home in the desert, as Edward Abbey has over near Tucson, I don't think so. It's difficult everywhere. Most days it's difficult. Some days it's wonderful. It's rapturous. But most days it's difficult.
Why did you choose to be a novelist?
I don't know. I always wanted to. I read authors when I was 16 and 17 who lived free and independent lives, who could live anywhere in the world, who always seemed to be going glamorous places and doing exciting things. Novelists like Thomas Wolfe and Somerset Maugham and Joseph Conrad and Ernest Hemingway, people like that. And I suppose I wanted to live that kind of a life.
Are the novelists, they say, if you want to learn the history of an era, read the novelists. Would you agree with that?
Yes. For example, if you take the 30s and 40s and maybe the 50s of this country, if you want to know about them, of course you must read the histories, but you should also read a novelist like John O'Hara. He has in his books all the minutiae of his era, of his time. The music, the dance steps, the country clubs.
The language.
The language. The values, from nightclubs, as I say, to country clubs. John O'Hara has it in his novels.
What was your first hit book?
It was a book called They Came to Cordova. I was 39 years old, finished it. I was a college professor. My wife was an elementary teacher. It's a book I'd wanted to write for a long while. The subject was courage. Mm-hmm. And during World War II, I was with an infantry division. First as a rifleman and later as a writer of citations for the Congressional Medal of Honor. So I became interested in the subject of courage and eventually wrote a book called They Came to Cordura, and it was taken at once by Random House. It was then sold to Columbia Pictures, and all of a sudden, overnight, I was a professional writer.
That's right. And that movie was heavy stars in that movie.
Yes. Gary Cooper, Rita Hayworth, Van Heflin, people like that.
Did you work on the film?
Yes, for 10 weeks at the Columbia Studios. I worked on the script.
That's a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
Oh, indeed. I asked for that in my sales contract simply because I wanted to see the inside of a film studio.
What did it feel like at age 39 to suddenly have a hit?
It's like winning the Arizona lottery.
Were you teaching creative writing?
No, I was teaching English literature, not creative writing.
Did you quit quit teaching?
Not immediately. I wasn't sure that the checks wouldn't bounce. So I asked for a promotion and a cut in salary, and got both.
Where did you come to write Where the Boys Are? I mean, you're in Arizona, you write great adventures and sweeping things, and you write of courage, and then you write about Fort Lauderdale.
Well, I was at Michigan State University teaching in the English department. I was teaching some honor sections of youngsters. They were brilliant, they were fun, they were kicks, and they kept talking about spring vacation in Fort Lauderdale. And sometime during that winter, it occurred to me I'd like to see what they did during spring vacation. So I asked them where I should put up in Fort Lauderdale, and if I came down, would they show me around? They told me where to stay. They met me at the airport, and I had a week with them. And they did indeed show me what went on in Fort Lauderdale. And it occurred to me as the week progressed that this would make a fine novel, a very funny novel, and yet I could at the same time write a kind of profile of that particular generation, their aspirations, their hopes, their fears, and so on. And that's what I tried to do.
Were you happy with that movie?
Sort of. It was very cute and a lot of fun. It's one of the few I have been happy with.
Yeah, you couldn't have been happy with the remake of it.
No, it was dreadful. Yeah. Dreadful. I had nothing whatever to do with it.
But it was your title.
My title.
Did they have to pay you?
Indeed.
Everybody's Jewish. Take the money and run. Back a step.
Yes.
You wrote the inscriptions on the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yes, they're called citations. And they run about 2 pages, double-spaced, and that's what is sent to the commanding general of the division, to the Corps commander, to the Army commander, and back to a congressional committee.
They send it to you, all the information, and you
go out and get the information. You get in your little Jeep, and you go out to the company, to the squad leader, to the companions or comrades of the one. Usually they were posthumous. Not always. If it wasn't posthumous, you brought the boy back to headquarters immediately to get him out of combat so that he wouldn't become a casualty before he was awarded the medal.
How did you approach the writing? Did you approach it as a stylized novelist and flowery descriptive, or did you approach it matter-of-fact reportive?
Oh, these are the citations you're talking about? Oh, matter-of-fact
I never
reporting.
talked to anyone who wrote citations.
Right. Matter-of-fact, absolutely. All the trivial details, the time of day, exactly where the event took place, the soldier's name, rank, and serial number. That's all about him. Then, briefly, as I say, in 1.5 to 2 pages, what he did, and that is followed up or combined with depositions from his comrades and from his platoon commander and from his company commander, attesting to the gallant act of which he is.
What was the first book you wrote with an Arizona setting?
Bless the Beasts and Children.
How many books have you written?
I've published 14. And with my wife, Kate, 6 children's books.
Do you like that too?
Yes, very much.
When you write a children's book, this fascinates me. Are you writing down?
I suppose you can't help it, but you try not to. Children's books are very difficult to do because kids won't give you any leeway. Kids don't read reviews. Kids don't give a darn about who you are or what you've done in the past. They sit down in a library and they glance through the first 2 or 3 pages. And if you haven't engrossed them or grabbed them in that period of time, you're through. They've had it. So you have to get down to the brass tacks of literature, to characterization and to story. You got to make that story move, and these have got to be real people.
What age group do you write to?
We write for the middle-aged child, anywhere from 10 to 14.
Real-life adventures?
Try to be real-life adventures, yes. Once in a while, a fantasy. We did one called T.V. Thompson that was a fantasy about a boy who disappeared into the interior of a television set and what he found there.
You write with your wife?
Yes, the children's books.
How does that work? I mean, would she write a chapter, you write a chapter?
No, we both talk a subject to death and a story to death and do that together. And we talk the characterizations out and get them down on paper of each principal character. Then I do the rough draft, and she edits me and makes changes and talks to me about vocabulary and so on.
So even though it is for that child, 10 to 14, it has the essence of what every good book should have, right?
Oh, it has to have. Kids are your severest critics.
Yeah, if you're going to tell a story, you got to tell it well, and you got to move them.
With adults, you can get away with many things, but not with children.
And with children aren't going to buy a book because Glendon Swarthout wrote it, or whoever wrote it, right?
They couldn't care less.
Do they sell well, by the way? Because they're always
quite well. If one begins to sell well, its life in bookstores is apt to be quite long. It just keeps pumping away year after year.
And this time of year, don't do bad.
No, indeed.
Tell me about the new book before we discuss some of the others. The Old Colts. What's it about?
I discovered in the course of reading several years ago that Bat Masterson, who was once the deputy sheriff of Ford County and who garnered a lot of renown as a gunfighter in those days around in Kansas and in Tombstone for a while and in Creede, Colorado, back in the 1880s, ended his life, the last 15 years of it, as a sports writer on the New York Daily Telegraph. Had a column every day. And I thought, how wonderful to have a gunfighter from Dodge City, Kansas, enjoying life on the Great White Way on Broadway in the 1910s. And I thought there ought to be a book in that. I can just see him. I also discovered in the course of my reading that when he left the West and went to New York City, he knew no one except the man in the White House, Teddy Roosevelt. Well, Bat took the biggest Colt that he had and put it in a holster under his jacket and arrived in New York City. And what happened was exactly what he wanted to happen. He was immediately arrested for carrying a weapon. And he made the headlines. And Teddy Roosevelt heard about it. And Teddy Roosevelt called him down to the White House and made him a federal marshal. Then he became a newspaperman and so on.
Well, continue. By the way, Glendon said to me when he came on, he says, I'm probably going to lose the whole audience because I'm dull. Very dull. Our guest is Glendon Swarthout. The new book is The Old Colts. We'll be right back on the Mutual Radio.
Masterson becomes a sports writer. And lo and behold, one day he is visited in New York City by one of his oldest and dearest friends, a gentleman named Wyatt Berry Stapp Earp.
This is where we now have Mr. Glendon's imagination coming in.
That's right.
That's right, gather that.
But how marvelous to get these two old boys in their 60s.
The Old Colts.
The Old Colts, together in New York City in 1916.
And what do they do?
They're both broke. Bat's in hock to a bookie. Wyatt is supported by his wife in California. He needs a stake. So they pull some capers in New York City. By the way, they get guns. Teddy Roosevelt gets them gun permits, and they buy old Colts and stick them in shoulder holsters. And by this time, of course, in New York City, there were the Arnold Rothsteins, there were gangsters who carried rods under their jackets and who also had begun to carry Thompson submachine guns. So Bat and Wyatt become embroiled with them. Bat and Wyatt pull off a couple of capers trying to raise money and can't. Well, there's one town in the United States in which they risk their lives day after day taking the hard cases to the calaboose. There's one town that owes them something. It's called Dodge City, Kansas. and back they go. To get even, to get their stake in Dodge City, by, of all things, you know the answer. You know what they're going to do. They're going to rob the bank. Therefore, you get your climax, your excitement, your denouement, and your story is over.
George C. Scott and who will be in the film?
There's been a lot of talk about a film, but casting would be difficult.
Well, you need two old leading men.
Two old leading men in their 60s. The only trouble is old men in their 60s are not box office. And young men who are box office won't pay old men in their 60s. So it's a catch-22 situation.
But Scott, as you told me, wanted to do the Shootist.
Indeed, he did.
But he wasn't bankable, so John Wayne did it. It was John's last movie, almost the story of the way he died.
That's right.
Wouldn't Scott be ideal now?
Scott would be ideal. So would Paul Newman. So would Jackie Nicholson. So would Robert Redford. So would a lot of guys who simply won't play it.
Won't play at 60.
They don't want to be thought of. Clint Eastwood would be fine. Clint says, I'm not going to play anybody over the hill.
How about as a television, as a mini-drama?
It would be very expensive to make.
Why?
Sets, New York City sets, you'd have to take a whole crew to Dodge City, Kansas, and for outdoor shooting, for exteriors, it'd be pretty expensive.
How'd you get the idea to do that?
I don't know. You think about, you sit back at your desk and you look out the window for a few days, and you think about Bat in New York and what could happen to him. And as soon as you remember his old friend Wyatt, you ask that magic question, what if? What if Wyatt showed up in New York?
Yeah,
that excites your imagination, and away you go.
All you needed was the true fact that Masterson was the sports writer.
That's right.
Why is the West so popular worldwide? For example, Gorbachev mentioned earlier by DeConcini loves American Westerns. Why?
The whole world does, and so do we. And the Western novel is having a resurgence these days, a renaissance. Books like Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. The Louis L'Amour books. There are a whole lot of good writers in the West who are coming into their own now. People like Wallace Stegner and William Eastlake and Charles Portis. There are others.
Zane Grey still sells, doesn't he?
Zane Grey still sells.
What is it about it, though?
It's the kind of simplification of life that we would all like to have. We would like to be able to identify the good guys and the bad guys by the color of their hats. We would like to have the rugged individualism that Westerners displayed. We would like the space, not only physically, but the space for our souls. We don't like to rub elbows all the time. We like the old-fashioned virtues, morality, courage, fidelity, trust, steadfastness, things like that. And these were to be found in the West as exemplified by a lot of people. It was also exciting and glamorous and dangerous. So it had everything, the American West. That's why it's still written about.
You know, I'm looking at you. Why don't you play one of the parts? I mean, you would be super. You look like a gun.
I'm too old, Larry.
Are Westerns difficult to write? Could we take a very good novelist and just by that nature mean that he could write a good Western?
I don't think so. You have to do a lot of research, and you have to be interested in the West. It's possible to write very good stories set in the West. The Shootist, for example, was set in El Paso in the year 1901. But it could have been set anywhere. It wasn't so much a Western as it was the story of a man coming face to face with his own death.
Oh.
And a man given the opportunity to make something of that death. Rather than dying wretchedly in bed, he had a chance to make a kind of social gesture of his death. So that is timeless. It has really nothing whatever to do with the West, and that's true of a lot of good books which are set out here.
But back to the Western.
Mm-hmm.
the novelist, the ordinary, let's say, the novelist who deals with the mystery novelist would have a difficult time because of research, whereas the Western reader knows that when you identify something, it better be where it is.
Yes. It's not always true. A few years ago, I set a task for myself. I wanted to write 3 different kinds of novels, one after the other, and see how I could do with them. I wanted to write one real Western. I wrote The Shootist. When that was finished, I wanted to write a Christmas story. The only Christmas story I've ever written. It was called The Melodeon, and I wrote it, and it was published. Then I wanted to try my hand at a mystery, the only one I had ever written, and I wrote one called Skeletons, and that was published. And so I then laid down my pen for a couple of years. But it is possible, if you make the effort and challenge yourself and do the research and do the thinking, and I mean looking out the windows days upon end, you can do this kind of thing.
I want to ask you a minute about courage and writing about it. My guest is one of our best, Glendon Swarthout. This is Larry King in Phoenix, back after these messages. Courage. Hemingway wrote a lot about courage.
Indeed.
I guess he described it as what? Pressure. Coolness under pressure, right?
Grace under pressure.
Grace under pressure. Is that a good definition as any?
I think so. As good as any, sure.
Is it a rare commodity?
I wrote the citations for about 13 or 14 Congressional Medals of Honor in the course of a year and a half with the 3rd Infantry Division in Italy and France. I knew some of the boys. They were about my age. I lived with them for a while. I talked with a lot of their comrades. And at the end of the war, when I came home, courage was almost as much a mystery to me then as it had been when I began.
It is it not?
There's a kind of chemistry of circumstance that takes place. When infantrymen are in training, they are always told toward the end of the training, if you ever become pinned down by enemy fire, don't despair, don't be afraid, because one of you will never know which one, but one of you will jump up and advance through a hail of fire and lead you. He may be killed in the act, but one of you will do this, and it will always happen because it always has. And indeed, that's true.
Audie Murphy told me
Indeed.
He has no idea why he did that. Audie Murphy was AWOL. Audie Murphy had a terrible report in basic training, was called a malingerer. He still didn't know why he went to that German nest.
He was my company for a while, my regiment and my division, Audie Murphy.
Do you know why he did it?
I haven't the faintest notion. Why a man or young woman, whoever, lays his life down for his fellow man. I have no idea why this happens. It's something instinctive, reflexive. There is no deliberate thought process involved. It simply happens.
Is it difficult to write about?
Surely, because it is a mystery. You just have people do it, and then you have people, as I did and They Came to Cordura, try to explain why, and you can't.
Was the Shootist a hero?
I think so. Because, as I said earlier, he tried to do something with his death. His death was inevitable, but he tried. What he did was wipe out the town's rough customers. The 3 or 4 most dangerous, malevolent men in town, he killed in the course of dying himself.
Great idea. Worked into a great book, wonderful movie, John Wayne. Just a poetic kind of ending. How'd you get the idea?
This is the strangest set of circumstances I've ever known. I was at home one night in Scottsdale shaving on the way out to a party. And while I was shaving and looking in the mirror, taking no chances, I suddenly got to thinking about the lone rider, the classic Western situation. The lone rider comes into town and rides down the main street. And what's on the main street? Well, here's the bank, and here are the saloons, and here's the livery stable, and here's the doctor's office. Here's the doctor's office. And I thought, suppose this lone rider is coming in to see the doctor. There's something wrong with him, and he wants to find out what it is. He's in great agony. And so he goes to the doctor, and the doctor's diagnosis is terminal cancer, and the prognosis is maybe 6 weeks to live. And I thought, what if this happened? What would he do? How many of the townspeople would really sympathize with him or would try to profit from his death? And couldn't you make quite a story of this last 6 weeks or 5 weeks or 4 weeks to the climactic moment when he decides to take matters into his own hands and choreograph his own demise? He could set the time and the place and the people who would take care of it. An unusual chance. And so this was the story.
Does any of your writing surprise you? I mean, did it go just as you thought it would go?
I left shaving, asked my wife to make me a cup of coffee, sat down in my skivs at my desk, and within half an hour I had almost a complete outline of the entire book. It has never happened this way before and probably never will again.
Did you title it?
Yes.
What a title.
I found out again in the course of research, which you have to do, that they were called in the newspapers of the 1880s, 1870s, 1890s, they were called gunmen, assassins, and shootists. Gunslinger or gunfighter is a very modern term, one we have coined. Gunmen, assassins, and shootists. Well, of those three, of course.
The Shootist.
The Shootist.
You wanted Scott to do the movie.
Very much. He wanted to very much.
Yeah, but he was not bankable.
He was not bankable, no.
And Wayne did it. Now, you had to be... That has to be a special place in you. I mean, his last movie...
Yes,
almost
it does.
Biographical, in a sense.
Yes, that's right.
Were you happy with...
coincidence.
Were you happy with the film?
Mostly, as an author usually is.
What disappointed you?
The ending, I thought, was a little saccharine. The boy turned out to be a Boy Scout, and in the book he certainly was not. I was sorry about that, but Wayne insisted on it. So that's the ending was changed. But you don't repine or deplore these things after a while. You get very used to them. Once a property or a book is bought by Hollywood, it's theirs, really.
What are you writing now?
I'm writing a very serious book. The Old Coals is a comedy. I'm trying to write a very serious book, a frontier novel. I don't know how much to say about it. It's very serious. It is very difficult to write. It's very powerful material. It wears me out after a couple of hours.
Does its characters ever surprise you?
Yes, the two principals do, frequently. I'm surprised at sudden turns in their character. There are depths in them that I'm only now exploring, that I didn't know at the beginning.
Do you ever feel sometimes like it's writing through you? I mean, you get up tomorrow and you don't know what they're going to do?
No, because I outline before I begin a book. I have almost a complete outline of every chapter.
But what happens in the thing can change or surprise you.
Yes. Some things surprise you because characters won't behave the way they're supposed to. They want to have a life of their own, and they want to do different things.
And how do you explain that since you're the writer, you're controlling them?
I don't know. Again, I don't know. My ignorance is monumental about these things.
My guest is Glendon Swarthout. We'll be back with our remaining moments. His newest is The Old Colts after this message. Thank you. When you live in a place like this and thinking the way you do, and of course writing the way you do you ever drive along the highway here or go to your house and wonder what it was like 100 years ago?
Yes, that's one of the first things I did out here on several occasions was just drive out into the desert, maybe 20 miles. And there are so many places you can go, so close to Phoenix. You stop the car, you turn off the engine. You get out and you walk off the highway a quarter of a mile so that the highway sounds disappear. And you have the most ineffable silence, the most marvelous silence that you can imagine. And then it's easy to visualize what it must have been like as, let us say, a lone wagon drove along. And suddenly it heard war whoops, or it heard rifle fire. Something menacing. But that silence is still here, and you don't have to go far to find it.
And you could almost visualize the ride and the good guys and the bad guys.
Indeed. And you could almost hear the bugle blowing the charge. And those blue uniformed men riding rapidly over the hill.
Some of the history that robbed us, as has been discovered by historians, many of the cowboys were black, were they not?
Oh, indeed.
Slaves who didn't go north but who went west.
They were wonderful cowboys.
Yeah, wonderful. In fact, the general thinking is that of the 13 who died at the OK Corral, I think 6 were black. Why did we not learn that?
Why are we what we are? Why do we live the way we do? Why do we hold the ideas and the prejudices that we do? I have no answer. I told you my ignorance is monumental.
What about the women of the West? A lady did a book a couple years ago on the great women of the West.
That's precisely what I'm writing now, is a book about the women.
Hers was a factual book, and it dealt with the strong women of the West.
Yes, this is going to be a novel. In the Great Plains states, the winters were terrible. I'm talking about the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, and so on. People lived in sod houses or in dugouts. Every winter, it's historically true, a small percentage of women went insane. Every single winter. And there was no place to put them, place to care for them. What in the world did they do with them?
What?
Read the book.
Score one for Glendon. Have you titled it?
No, not yet. I have 3 or 4. I want it to be right, and I'll decide between now and 87 or so.
Titles are very important.
Extremely important.
Do you ever find yourself writing a book and get an idea for another?
Oh, yes. That's always been the way it has happened.
And what do you do then? Jot that down and put it...
You jot it right away. Oh, it's like money in the bank. You can't lose it. You must not lose it. I have found now that I can think of something during the night and hold it, and it's the first thing I think of in the morning. Then I go put it down.
Have there been some that didn't pan out?
Oh, indeed. You have your duds, you have your bombs. I've had 4 or 5. Yes.
Ideas that didn't work, too?
No, books that didn't work. Books that were second grade.
What book did you have the most expectation for that disappointed you in the public's reaction?
The Melodeon, My Christmas Story. It was a bad title. The publisher tells me years later, it's a very bad title because no one could pronounce melodeon. No one knew what a melodeon was.
What is a melodeon?
It's an old foot-pedaled organ. You pushed air through the bellows by means of pedals. The book should have been entitled A Christmas Gift because it was a gift of a melodeon. But I, in all my stubbornness and brilliance, called it the Melodeon, and it died by New Year's.
Have we got a lot of good young writers coming along?
Many. And many out here at Arizona State, I'm proud to say. I am amazed at some of the writing that they do. The depth of their experience, the professionalism of their storytelling. A lot of good ones at Arizona State.
Do you agree with Erskine Caldwell, who said that the good novelist is basically, first and foremost, whether he's Dostoevsky or Dashiell Hammett, a good storyteller?
By all means. I think he has to be. It's always been that way. There have always been some storytellers, whether it was in the caves, telling people around the flickering fire, or whether it's now in bookstores. A storyteller has always been important to his society and to civilization.
Can you teach it?
No. You can advise them about some errors not to make, some shortcuts to take, but that driving force, that fictional force, has got to be in them. They must write or they cannot write.
It has been great seeing you again. I thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me, Larry.
Glendon Swarthout. His newest is The Old Cokes, published by Donald Fine, and he wrote The Shootist and Bless the Beast and the Children Where the Boys Are, etc. They came to Cordora. We are going to pause for news, a word from your local stations, and then...